Hi, it's Jan Peter, and today I am going to restore a very challenging Commodore 64. So here it is, the Commodore 64 I'm going to try to fully restore. This was sent to me by Martin, and I want to thank you for that. This is a machine that has quite some nostalgia for Martin. He used this back in the day when this was still a recent computer system, and then he made the switch to the PC world, and this was stored in his parents' attic and just resurfaced recently. He bought this used back in the day with a number of discs that all didn't survive the storage in the attic for some decades. He told me that they basically melted. So the discs are not savable at this point, but maybe this Commodore 64 can be brought back to its glory. Obviously, thank you very, very much, Martin, for trusting me with this. I know that you can get attached to computers like this, especially if they were the first system you ever used. So yeah, I'm really going to put some love into this restoration. I hope I can make this shine again, to some extent at least. As you can see, Martin already removed the screws. He told me he cleaned this on the surface. It's still pretty crusty. We're going to do some more cleaning, I suppose. First of all, let's take a look at the circuit board and see if the electronics themselves work at all. So this is a Commodore 64 board revision 250407. All the chips are in here. I think the VIC-2 and the SID chip. This is the graphics chip, this is the sound chip, in case you don't know. These are socketed usually on all Commodore 64s. There are some additional sockets, so I suppose there were some repairs on this. Also the date codes. The original date codes seem to be from 1984. On these soldered down chips there is a 1985 CIA chip here in a socket that probably got replaced at some point. There's a 7406 that got replaced. I'm going to take this out of the case. The screws are already removed. So yeah, all the screws are removed. So this side cover is also coming off. We're going to take a look at the case parts later. First of all, we're going to be concerned with getting this board to work, or testing this. Maybe this works. So the very first thing I usually do when getting one of these boards is to give it a thorough visual inspection and look for parts that look broken, or like burned components, broken traces, repairs that have been previously done. As you've seen, there's sockets, so there are probably solder joints that are not original. I'm going to inspect this thoroughly. I am going to remove the SID chip because these easily break if you are not careful, and in case there's some kind of overvoltage on the board, I don't want to risk ruining that. Not sure if this works at all, because the SID chips tend to disintegrate by just sitting around, basically, often. Unfortunately, they are getting rarer. If it works at all, it should start up fine without the SID, just without sound, obviously, because this is the sound chip. All the components seem to be there. It looks pretty clean. Martin cleaned this previously. Let's look at the soldering. There's some residue on these bits here, which is actually normal. I think these RF modulators are hand soldered. They used to be hand soldered back in the day in the factories, so there's usually some residue there, some flux residue. This has clearly been replaced. This has too. You can see the brown spots here that are flux that hasn't been cleaned off thoroughly. So that looks pretty good, actually. I'm going to clean this a bit more with some alcohol to remove the flux and see if the joints are all good. Should be relatively easy to remove. This looks pretty good. pretty decent solder job. Might resolder some of these joints because some are pretty blobby in this area here. But I don't see any damaged traces, which is a good sign. I'm also going to clean the flux residue from this RF modulator. There are some joints that look pretty bad on these joystick ports here. They have been cut flush, or too flush actually. So maybe I'm going to reflow some of those as well. But it shouldn't technically be an issue because they still seem to make contact. And as you probably know, I'm always happy to work on Commodore 64s because they are my favorite systems to work on in general, and probably the systems I know the most about. Yeah, doesn't look that bad. I suppose we can risk trying to power this on at this point without the SID chip. Let me take a couple of seconds to thank the sponsor for this video, PCBWay, my favorite manufacturer of prototype PCBs of all kinds. The quality they deliver is exceptional. The prices are super reasonable and delivery times are super quick. So I highly recommend checking out the link in the video description in case you want your own circuit boards made, and check out PCBWay. Let's get back to restoring the Commodore 64. So I have hooked this up to my shoddy upscaler here. I have hooked this up to my self-made power supply, which I trust a lot more than the original power supplies. So let's see if we get any output from this at all. We got a PAL signal, but nothing else. It's a black screen C64, so we are going to have to do some repair work. That was kind of to be expected. Yeah, we're getting sync signal, but nothing else, just a black screen. So usually the first thing I do before I do anything else is to check if any of the chips get overly hot. The PLA gets a bit warm. The RAM on this one is NEC RAM, which is usually pretty good. There are some brands of RAM chips, like the MT brand, that are not really trustworthy at all. But these stay cool, which is a good sign. If you have shorted RAM, they usually get really hot really quickly. PLA gets really hot, so probably this has a broken PLA. The VIC-2 gets warm, but that's to be expected. These run pretty warm in general. The voltage regulators don't get overly warm. All seems normal. The fuse is intact actually. PLA maybe. And this really gets suspiciously warm. Good rule of thumb is if you can leave your finger on there for a minute and you don't want to take it away because it doesn't get overly hot, it's good. This gets too warm. I feel like burning my finger if I leave it on there for longer than a couple of seconds. I guess this one has a broken PLA chip. Just from this visual and thermal inspection. I am now going to plug in a DET test cartridge, which is one of the usual Commodore 64 test cartridges, the one that works without any test harnesses. Basically a standalone cartridge that you just plug in. This overrides quite a few of the chips on here. This works without a working kernel ROM. It just basically needs the processor to work, the VIC-2 to work to output a picture, and it also needs the PLA to somewhat work to start up. So if this starts up, it is going to show me what is at fault in this Commodore 64. If this doesn't start up, there might be an issue with the processor or the PLA. Or maybe the VIC-2 is too broken to display anything. But we're going to see. I'm just going to try this. The DET test cartridge takes a couple of seconds to start up, even if everything is all right with the system. But then it should start up, so we're going to leave this on for a couple of seconds, 30 seconds or so. It should display something. Yeah, we don't get anything. So yeah, that would point to a completely shot PLA, basically. It all points to a broken PLA chip, which is a super common fault in the Commodore 64s, as I said. So let's desolder this, put in a socket and replace it with a working PLA or a PLA replacement. I'm not sure what I have in stock, but at least I have a couple of PLA replacements that I can try in this. Fired up the desoldering station and we're going to desolder the PLA. I removed most of the solder from the bottom side of the circuit board and I'm now going to use hot air to melt the rest from this side. Usually that works pretty well. There we go. And I think we managed to remove this without any lifted pads or anything like that. I'm going to free up the remaining holes here with some solder wick and put a socket in. So I got a nice turned pin socket in there. I am going to use a PLA replacement. This is the PLAnkton, one of the best PLA replacements ever in there. This, and it fits the turned pin socket nicely. Let's see if that gives us something to work with at least. Yes! Okay. That was kind of too easy, wasn't it? Broken PLA just diagnosed with my fingers and feeling the heat. So this seems to be a working C64. Let's run some checks. It seems this C64 works fine. I am going to run the dead test card again, I guess. And as I said, it takes a couple of seconds to start up. Should start up and display the diagnostics. Yes, it does. Obviously, the tests that require a SID chip are still going to fail because I didn't put that back yet. But we are hopefully going to get some readings that show us if the rest of the system works properly. Which it seems it does at this point. Yeah, this is the point where the sound test would activate, but of course we can't hear any sound without a SID chip. It seems to be a working C64. It passes all the tests except for the sound test at this point. The dead test is not an in-depth diagnostics, so we're going to run some more tests, but it appears to be fixed. Yeah, I think at this point I can put the SID chip back in and see if that works, which would be nice. Okay, this is another test cartridge, and we indeed get sound from the SID chip. So I fixed up the keyboard. I'm going to have to clean this at some point, but just wanted to see if it worked. And indeed, it does work fine. This is not of much concern. We are going to clean this later. I am going to do some more restoration work on the board though. At this point, I'm going to do my regular future-proofing moves on the board itself. It appears to work fine now. I tested some games and some demos and everything seems to be hunky-dory with this board. So I'm going to replace all the electrolytic capacitors on this one. I'm going to add heat sinks to the chips that tend to run a bit warm. And I'm probably also going to replace the voltage regulators. I'm not going to go into great detail. I'm just going to do it like this. So, I replaced all the electrolytic capacitors on this board, which are actually quite a few on these older Commodore 64 boards. I glued some proper heat sinks on the chips that get hot. Usually I would glue one on an original PLA, but this replacement doesn't get warm at all. I replaced the voltage regulators, replaced the thermal compound on the heatsink on the 7805. I also replaced the bridge rectifier here with the beefier one, because that ran pretty warm and these can fail. So I'm not sure if that was already slightly damaged or not. Just replaced it to be sure. Also cleaned up the board a bit more. And I also removed the RF modulator, replaced the capacitors in there, soldered it back in, and even signed the board underneath, as is tradition in the lab here. So this should hopefully be still a working and refurbished Commodore 64 board. Yep, indeed. I'm going to leave this running for a while and see how the temperatures develop and if any of the capacitors gets hot because I accidentally placed it in the wrong polarity. It happens. Pretty sure I didn't make any fatal mistakes this time. If you want to see this whole refurbishment process in more detail, I made a couple of videos about that now. That's why I didn't show it in this video. I'm going to link the videos with more detailed information about how I usually do this in the video description. So you can watch that if you're interested. The next step is going to be trying to make this case look somewhat nice again. I'm not sure how I'm going to go about this. I think the most reasonable thing to do would be to replace this. There's still a couple of newly produced Commodore 64C cases around that you can buy, but yeah, just for the sake of the argument and because I have never tried doing that, I am going to thoroughly wash this, try to use some kind of filler to fill in the holes and then probably paint it. I've never painted a Commodore 64 case before. This seems to be a specimen that otherwise is not really fixable in any reasonable way, so I'm probably going to try it for the first time on this one. And if I fail, I'm going to end up using a replacement case, but I think it's worth trying to save this at least. Yeah, so first of all, this goes into some soapy water for a few hours, I guess, and I'm going to let it soak. I'm going to try to remove this sticker here and the LED holder that's still in there before I do that. I'm usually not a huge fan at all of painting these cases, but in this case, as you can see, this is pretty much lost anyway, so probably that's the most reasonable option to make this look okay again. I'm going to try to remove this power sticker. I actually have a replacement badge for this position from another C64 repair. Yep, that did work. Nice. Okay, into the water this goes. I'm also going to try to remove this sticker to reapply it later. Okay, that worked. Trying to get these out. Which are also just, yeah, this is just double-sided tape, I think. So, trying to remove the sticker residue here. Probably somebody closed this hole with the sticker. Wow, okay, that's stubborn stuff. Okay, this must be one of the worst condition cases I've seen yet. Yeah, I think I want to soak this and then see what I can do. So I sprayed this with some fast solvent cleaner, like kitchen cleaner. This stuff is pretty aggressive. I hope it doesn't damage the plastic, but it should be good for degreasing this initially, and then I'm going to just soak it in water, in soapy water, and use some sponges and some brushes to clean it off. At this point, I'm also going to remove all the keycaps and give them a soak in soapy water. Using two containers here, one for the springs that are located underneath the keycaps, and I'm using my keycap puller to not risk damaging the keycaps. The whole assembly probably has been cleaned already, but some of the keycaps look pretty dirty, so I'm definitely going to soak these for a while and scrub them with a toothbrush, and I'm also going to give this a quick wipe. But it looks so clean that I don't need to disassemble this or anything like that. I think that was already done not so long ago. Unfortunately, the print on the sides of the keys really easily rubs off. I don't know how that got damaged. I've never seen that in this state, but yeah, we're going to have to live with that, I guess. Some of them are good, but on this F1, the F2, I can just wipe that away with my finger, basically. That's not how it's supposed to be. No idea if they used, look at that, no idea if they used some kind of water-soluble lacquer or something. Commodore. A strange thing happened with the case. It actually got this discoloration that looks like kind of over retro-brighting it or something. Maybe there was so much dirt on there that these are visible, or maybe my degreaser caused that, but on the bottom part there's no signs of that same issue, so not sure what causes that, but we're going to paint this anyway, so not too bothered about that. I wiped this down with alcohol so it's completely grease-free. I washed my hands, I'm going to use gloves, and I'm going to try to plug these holes now. And I'm going to use this universal polyester filler that I actually bought to use on a bump in my car, but never got around to doing that, and my car is a bump now. I don't care. It's an old car. So we're going to try to use this. It shouldn't really hurt the plastic, hopefully. Comes with a hardener, and we're going to have to mix this. I'm going to wear a mask, and I'm going to have a fan blowing on my work area. I'm also going to wear gloves, because this stuff is pretty nasty if you get it on your hands, in your eyes, anywhere. Activating all the safety measures I can come up with. First of all, I'm going to tape these holes from the backside with some masking tapes, because we only want to fill these craters, basically. Don't really need the gloves for that, but I forgot. So yeah, mixing my stuff here. Let's see. So we're going to put our filler in there, our hardener, and mix it up. So let's see. Should be able to just take small amounts of this stuff. and kind of fill them in our holes. And we're going to have to sand this later anyway, so... Wow, it's already getting hard. It's already stiffening. Okay, so here's what we have. We're going to do some sanding afterwards. This already got hard. You got like 4 minutes or something to work with this, and this is what I got to in that amount of time. Better than before, I guess. The holes are plugged at least. So let's see how this turns out. I'm going to let this settle for an hour or so and then come back and see what we got. So I let this sit for quite a while, and I think my filler is sandable now, and that's what I'm going to do. This part here is going to be challenging because I'm going to try to kind of remodel the fins that go through this line here. But yeah, this part should be pretty straightforward. I'm just going to sand it down a tiny little bit to hopefully have a smooth surface in the end. Yeah, that works pretty well. I guess this is going to be better than before. It's never going to turn out perfect, probably. So I managed to kind of remodel this area. It's not perfect by any account, but I'm going to leave it at that. And I think I did a reasonable job given the state this was in before and given the fact that I've done something like this for the very first time. I also think this filler is not the ideal thing. It's meant to be used on cars, as I said. Not the ideal filler for this purpose. There's finer fillers for plastics and things like that, so probably a better idea to use something like that. But this was what I had lying around, and this is kind of an experimental thing anyway for me. Yeah, it wouldn't be too much of a loss if this case actually didn't survive this. So yeah, I'm not too worried about this. I'm going to degrease this again with alcohol and then prime it with a primer. Primer lacquer kind of thing. De-dust and degrease is the thing. This seems to be pretty sturdy at least. The filler worked really well in that regard. This is a primer filler combination that I'm going to use based on epoxy actually. So we're going to see. That's this part primed, I guess. Let's do the bottom part as well. Yummy! Looks pretty good already. Yeah, this looks pretty decent already, I guess. Unfortunately, you can still see some of the craters there. But yeah, definitely there's no holes anymore. And it does look better than before, I guess. So we made some progress, at least in that regard. In theory, I could have spent a lot more time on this, used proper filler, and probably have these craters disappear. But I'm pretty chuffed with this, actually. It looks pretty decent. I'm going to do a second pass with the primer, and I'm also going to paint the perimeter of the inside of the case to not have any seams that are visible. Okay, on to the black paint, which is also an epoxy-based lacquer, matte black. I left this to dry overnight. I think it is better than before. You can still see some of these craters here where the holes used to be. This section here looks a bit destroyed because it was. My reconstruction is obviously not perfect. But I guess this proves that you can do a reconstruction like this and repaint the case. And you don't have to use black, obviously. That's just what I had in the lab here. And yeah, I'm pretty pleased with this, actually. It doesn't look bad. It definitely looks better than previously. So that's the top part. It's still a bit sticky, so I'm not going to try to handle this too much. The bottom part also turned out pretty nicely, so I'm going to add some new rubber feet to here and reapply the sticker. And yeah, I didn't bother to paint the insides, as you've seen, just the regions where you can see kind of things shining through. So I painted all the interiors of these connectors and things like that, or the connector cutouts. Yeah, does look pretty nice, actually. Of course, obviously, I could have taken a lot more care with this and it would be a better result. Also, the lab is not at all dust-free, so there's dust like constantly settling on this. But yeah, it was worth the try and the effort, and we got a somewhat okay Commodore 64 bread bin case again in black. So one thing I noticed is that this standoff that goes here is broken off. So I'm going to glue that back before I put it back together. Just using my regular plastic glue here for that purpose. And I'm going to let that settle. And we are also going to put some new feet on the bottom case. These are just standard rubber feet, 3M brand, for electrical appliances. Yeah, these are better than the originals. So in order to fit this badge back here, I bought some really thin double stick tape. There you go, almost as good as new. And I'm going to use the same tape to remount the Commodore badges. As I said, I have a replacement badge for the Commodore 64 logo. Also going to put the LED holder back in. And I was thinking of using a green LED because I think that would look pretty amazing with the black case. Yeah, I think that's going to look pretty amazing. I'm going to make a new LED cable and use the green LED. I think that is going to look pretty amazing. So I'm just going to solder this on to some new wires, and I'm going to crimp on a little pin header on the other side. There's a 3-pin pin header used for this job originally. I'm going to use the same. The connector on the Commodore 64 mainboard actually is 3 pins. The outer pins are the positive and the inner pin, center pin, is ground. So you can plug it in each way. We are only going to populate 2 wires on the connector, and I'm going to use heat shrink tubing on these to insulate them. The long lead on the LED is the positive one, the anode. There we go, new LED cable. So now to mount this in the case, there's this ring that goes on the locking mechanism from the backside. This should fit in here pretty nicely. And the ring does no longer lock in place. That's not good. So I'm probably going to add a bit of hot glue from this side to fix it. So here's what these normally look like. You can use this part that goes through the case from the top side to lock the LED in place, and then usually you lock that with this ring. But this is kind of worn out too much, so I'm just going to put some hot glue in there and fit the ring, I guess. Yeah, I'm just going to add some general purpose glue, I guess, and let that settle. Now for everybody's favorite part of the restoration. Keyboard reassembly time! Yay! And then it's time to put it all back together. So the keyboard mounts back in here. That looks pretty nice, actually, with the black and the green LED. I like it. Ta-da! It really turned out pretty nicely, given the state it was in previously, before restoration. Of course, I could have done a way better job with this if I took more time. But yeah, as this was kind of an experiment, I'm pretty pleased with this, and it looks really nice in black, actually. It's all back together. Let's see if it actually still works. Yay! And the green power LED looks pretty good as well. So yeah, let's test this for a bit. I tested some games and some demos and things like that, and it appears to work fine. There is a remaining issue with the graphics though. I think that the VIC-2 chip might be a bit damaged. I got some flickering sprites and some blur and some scrolling that didn't actually work correctly. So that's usually an indicator for a VIC-2 graphics chip that is going bad or has already gone bad, really. So I don't have a spare VIC-2 chip at this point, so I'm not going to replace that. I think that's the only remaining issue this system has, and I'm going to put a new one in there once I get my hands on one. So yeah, I think that's it for this restoration. It was quite a challenge. I did the best that I could with the things I had lying around here anyway. As I said, this was kind of an experimental kind of thing. The paint job is not quite perfect, but I think for the first time I painted a computer case like this, it turned out pretty nicely. And I would definitely use different filler if I attempt something like this for the next time. Just something that is aimed at plastics and not at being used at cars or anything like that. Yeah, other than that, I think this was kind of a success. I hope this was informative for you and maybe you got some entertainment out of my struggles with this one. Thank you so much for supporting me on Patreon and on the channel memberships page here, and your single donations on Ko-fi and on PayPal. The links are in the video description in case you want to donate something. I'm very grateful for everything. I think that's it for today. I'm Jan Beta. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye!